Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to explore one of the most intriguing and controversial events in recent strategic history, the collapse of the land bridge. Was it a brilliant calculated move, or a dangerous step that pushed the world closer to escalation? To understand this, we need to look beyond the surface of maps and military lines. We need to understand the deeper logic of power, geography, and decision-making that shapes global strategy. The term land bridge might sound simple, but its meaning runs deep in military and geopolitical language. A land bridge is more than just a stretch of territory. It's a vital connection, a corridor that links one controlled area to another. Through that corridor, armies can move supplies, reinforcements, and communication lines. It's what makes a distant territory sustainable. Without it, even the strongest outpost can become isolated and vulnerable. Throughout history, the creation and collapse of land bridges have defined wars and borders. Ancient empires fought to secure narrow passages that connected their heartlands to new conquests. In modern times, nations fight for similar connections, only now they are backed by advanced logistics, railways, pipelines, and highways. The principle remains the same. A land bridge represents continuity of control, while its collapse marks fragmentation. In the case we're analyzing, the land bridge was not just a piece of geography, but a symbol of power projection. It connected territories under one influence, allowing movement, trade, and military coordination. Its creation changed the strategic balance. It gave one side confidence and forced the other to adapt, but when that bridge collapsed, the consequences were dramatic. Suddenly, what was once a secure link turned into a vulnerability. What had symbolized strength began to look like overreach. So the big question emerges, was the collapse planned? Was it a strategic masterstroke meant to force the opponent's hand? Or was it an unintended consequence of overextension, miscalculation, or external pressure? To answer this, we have to understand both the logic of creating a land bridge and the implications of losing it. Building a land bridge always starts with the idea of control. Control over resources, over access routes, over security. By connecting separated territories, a state or power block reduces dependence on sea routes or air transport, which can be disrupted easily. The land bridge becomes a safer, more predictable path. It also sends a message to rivals that you are not just occupying land, but integrating it. You're making it part of a unified system. However, maintaining such a corridor comes with heavy responsibility. Every kilometer must be defended, supplied, and maintained. Every town or checkpoint along it becomes both a lifeline and a potential target. The longer the bridge, the greater the exposure. And in times of conflict, the enemy naturally focuses on cutting that connection. Because once the link breaks, everything on the far side is endangered. That's why the collapse of a land bridge is so significant. It's not merely a tactical loss, it's a strategic shockwave. It changes morale, momentum, and perception. The side that built it suddenly faces logistical nightmares, while the opposing side gains the psychological upper hand. The collapse becomes both a physical and symbolic event. It tells the world that control has limits, that expansion meets resistance, and that strategy sometimes turns against its maker. But could the collapse also be deliberate? There are moments in history when retreat is used as a weapon. When armies step back, not because they're defeated, but because they're luring their opponent forward. A controlled withdrawal can create the illusion of weakness while setting a trap. If done skillfully, it can lead the enemy into overextension, a position that looks strong but is actually precarious. If the collapse of the land bridge was such a maneuver, then it might indeed be a masterstroke. Think of it this way. By letting the corridor fall, one side might have achieved several objectives at once. It could have shortened its defensive line, freed up resources, and forced the opponent to spread thin. It might have exposed the enemy to new vulnerabilities, or drawn global attention to the instability of the region, prompting diplomatic or economic reactions that work in its favor. In that sense, the collapse becomes not an accident, but a calculated transformation of the battlefield. Yet there's always the darker side of such events. If the collapse wasn't controlled, if it resulted from pressure, internal failure, or misreading of the situation, then it becomes the spark of escalation. When supply routes fail and communication lines break, desperation sets in. Political leaders feel cornered, and history shows that cornered powers make risky choices. They may escalate militarily to reestablish control. They may invoke alliances or unleash new technologies of warfare. What begins as a logistical failure can quickly spiral into a regional or even global crisis. In such moments, perception is everything. The side that loses the land bridge may feel humiliated or vulnerable. The side that gains ground may become overconfident. Both misperceptions can lead to dangerous moves. A confident aggressor may push too far, while a threatened state may overreact. The balance between showing strength and avoiding escalation becomes razor thin. So, was the collapse of the land bridge a masterstroke or an escalation? To judge that, we must examine intent, preparation, and aftermath. If it was anticipated and leveraged to achieve broader goals, it can be seen as a masterstroke of adaptation. If it was unplanned and destabilizing, it leans toward escalation. The distinction lies in control, who controlled the tempo, the timing, and the narrative. Control is the hidden currency of strategy. The side that controls the narrative controls perception. If the collapse is presented as a strategic reorientation, a deliberate shift of focus, then even a setback can look like foresight. History is full of examples where retreats were reframed as strategic pauses or redeployments. But if the collapse is chaotic, if forces are trapped or territories lost without explanation, the world interprets it as weakness. Allies doubt, rivals exploit, and escalation follows. The collapse of a land bridge also exposes the fragile balance between geography and technology. In an age of precision strikes, drones, and satellite surveillance, physical corridors are more vulnerable than ever. Every convoy can be tracked. Every bridge, tunnel, and highway becomes a potential choke point that makes the task of maintaining a land bridge exponentially harder. It also means that the decision to let it go or to risk everything to save it carries enormous weight. In geopolitical terms, a land bridge represents not only military logistics, but also political ambition. It's a claim to permanence, the statement that we are here to stay. Its collapse shakes that claim. It changes diplomatic conversations, investor confidence, and even national morale. When the bridge collapses, borders feel uncertain again. The ripple effects go beyond the battlefield. They enter markets, media, and the minds of ordinary citizens. Now imagine the leaders and analysts watching this unfold. Some see opportunity. They think this is the moment to push further, to capitalize on the enemy's retreat. Others see danger. They warn that pushing too hard might provoke a desperate counterattack or bring in new actors. The tension between caution and aggression defines every stage that follows a land bridge collapse. That's why historians often say that what happens after the collapse matters more than the collapse itself. Strategically, the collapse creates what experts call a vacuum of control. Nature and politics both hate vacuums. Someone always moves to fill the gap, whether it's a local militia, a rival state, or an external power. That's how regional conflicts expand into larger confrontations. A small corridor becomes the fault line between global powers. Every move in that area becomes charged with meaning. Even humanitarian convoys or infrastructure repairs are read as strategic signals. From a purely military point of view, the collapse forces a reassessment of logistics. Supply lines have to be rerouted, sometimes through longer or riskier paths. Air and sea transport must compensate for the loss of land routes, straining budgets and slowing operations. Soldiers on the ground feel the difference first. Supplies arrive late, reinforcements come thin, and morale dips. Commanders must decide whether to stabilize the front, withdraw, or counterattack. Each option carries consequences. The political leadership, meanwhile, faces its own crisis. They must explain the loss to their people and allies while maintaining an image of control. They may frame it as a temporary adjustment or a necessary sacrifice. But behind closed doors, the pressure mounts. Advisors debate whether to escalate militarily, negotiate, or wait for the situation to stabilize. It's at this stage that rhetoric can become as dangerous as rockets. Words like red line and existential threat start circulating, locking leaders into positions that are hard to reverse. At this point, the world watches closely. News channels broadcast maps with arrows and shaded zones. Commentators talk about turning points. Diplomats issue cautious statements about de-escalation, while analysts speculate about the next moves. The collapse of a land bridge may seem like a local event, but its symbolism resonates globally. It reminds everyone how fragile strategic ambitions can be. But the story doesn't end there. Sometimes the collapse becomes the catalyst for innovation. Deprived of their land route, states may invest in alternative infrastructure, new alliances, or technologies that reduce dependence on geography. In this sense, collapse becomes a lesson in adaptation. It forces a shift from rigid territorial thinking to flexible, multi-domain strategy, combining cyber, air, and sea power in new ways. History shows that those who adapt fastest often emerge stronger from crisis. Still, adaptation takes time, and time is a luxury in war and diplomacy. The period immediately after a land bridge collapse is the most dangerous. Emotions run high, communication breaks down, and decision makers face uncertainty. Each side interprets the other's silence or hesitation as intent. One side sees restraint, the other sees weakness. One sees preparation, the other sees provocation. The fog of uncertainty thickens, and that's when miscalculations happen. So, what lessons can we learn from this? First, no strategy should depend entirely on a single line of connection. Redundancy is key. Multiple routes, both physical and digital, reduce vulnerability. Second, communication and perception management are vital. How a collapse is communicated often determines whether it's seen as failure or flexibility. Third, leaders must recognize when to defend and when to withdraw. Holding a collapsing corridor at all costs may feel brave, but it can lead to greater loss. The collapse of the land bridge reminds us that power projection is not just about expansion, but about sustainability. Real strength lies in knowing when to consolidate and when to let go. If the collapse was planned, if it served to realign strategy and force the enemy into overextension, then it was indeed a masterstroke. It turned loss into leverage, transforming geography into opportunity. But if it was accidental, unplanned, and unmanaged, then it marks escalation, a step toward chaos rather than control. In every age, great powers face this dilemma: to connect or to retreat, to build or to dismantle. The collapse of a land bridge encapsulates that eternal tension between ambition and restraint. It challenges the myth of linear progress in strategy, the belief that expansion always equals success. Sometimes contraction is wisdom. Sometimes collapse is not defeat but evolution. As analysts and observers, we should also remember that every strategic move carries human consequences. Behind the abstractions of land bridge and corridor are real communities, families, and lives disrupted. When bridges collapse, people lose homes, routes, and stability. Understanding the human cost grounds our analysis in reality. It reminds us that strategy, at its core, is about managing human outcomes, not just territorial equations. As the dust settles after such a collapse, both sides reassess. The side that lost the corridor rebuilds, not just physically, but psychologically. The side that gained territory must decide whether to hold it or negotiate. The international community adjusts its calculus. Some states see opportunities. Others worry about instability. Energy routes, trade lanes, and alliances subtly shift. The collapse, in effect, redraws the mental map of the region. Years later, historians will debate what really happened. Some will argue that the collapse was inevitable, that geography and overextension doomed it from the start. Others will claim it was orchestrated, a deliberate act of strategic realignment. The truth might lie somewhere in between. What's clear is that the event changed how powers think about connectivity, vulnerability, and control. In that sense, the collapse of the land bridge is more than a local incident. It's a case study in the evolution of modern strategy. It shows that in an interconnected world, every corridor, physical or digital, is both an asset and a liability. To build is to invite dependence. To collapse is to invite instability. The challenge for leaders is to balance the two, to wield geography as a flexible tool rather than a fixed trap. So, was it a masterstroke or an escalation? The answer may depend on perspective. From the lens of innovation and adaptation, it looks like a masterstroke, a bold redefinition of limits. From the lens of security and stability, it feels like escalation, a disruption that shakes the order. Perhaps it was both, a masterstroke that triggered escalation, or an escalation that revealed strategic genius in hindsight. Strategy, after all, is rarely black and white. What matters most is what comes next. If the collapse leads to reflection, restraint, and new approaches to stability, then it serves as a turning point toward wisdom. If it leads to vengeance, rearmament, and wider confrontation, then it becomes a warning. The future depends on how decision makers interpret the meaning of collapse as a loss to avenge or as a lesson to learn. And that brings us to the timeless truth of geopolitics. Control is temporary, but consequences are lasting. Every bridge, whether of land, ideas, or diplomacy, carries the same risk. It can unite or divide, stabilize or destabilize. The collapse of one bridge can reshape the future far beyond its borders. So, as we look back on this event, let's remember that strategy is not just about winning battles, but about sustaining balance. The collapse of the land bridge teaches that strength is not in holding every inch of ground, but in understanding when to advance, when to withdraw, and when to transform loss into learning. In that light, maybe the real masterstroke is not in building bridges or letting them fall, but in mastering the art of adaptation itself. Thank you for watching, and thank you for taking the time to think deeply about this crucial moment in modern strategy. If you found this analysis valuable, make sure to stay curious, stay critical, and keep asking the questions that shape how we understand power in our changing world. Until next time, take care and see you soon.